the safe harbor, as it has already been mentioned. I mean, the idea that in principle, legislation in any part of the world should be based on the principle of intermediary liability exemption, the exemption of liability for intermediaries. So intermediaries shouldn't be held responsible as a general principle for the content that they distribute. Holding them responsible for the content they distribute or imposing excessive obligations like monitoring obligations, like reporting obligations, like certain types of content monitoring obligations would only put in danger freedom of expression, because in order to be safe, intermediaries would overreact, remove content in order to avoid responsibility, in order to avoid liability. That's the first basic, let's say, international principle that can also be found in Section 230, the so-called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act in the United States and the current e-commerce directive in Europe. It's true that now in Europe, we are facing a certain crisis when it comes to this principle, because as it has already been mentioned, Germany has adopted a law that seems to impose certain obligations in the field of content moderation, and also in the UK, within the context of the so-called Online Harms Initiative. I mean, it seems that a regulator will be monitoring the way platforms moderate content. Well, this has triggered criticisms from the side of international organizations, from the side of freedom of expression organizations. And I can say that even in the context of the Digital Services Act at the EU level, the kind of obligations that are going to be imposed to platforms are not as strong as these obligations that we have seen at the European level. And then we will have a very interesting problem, because we will have some sort of a contradiction between national legislation and the future new Digital Services Act, which is something that will be a headache for the European Commission, I anticipate. But anyhow, this is a different debate, but it's something definitely to be followed. Also, I'd like to note that according to certain reports, I mean, something funny is that the NetzDG, the German act, apparently has been used as a source of inspiration by many authoritarian regimes in the world, not democratic regimes, but authoritarian regimes, as a tool to really dominate the internet. So, I mean, here we have a very, very interesting discussion, but still the main principle, intermediary liability exemptions, is valid and something to be taken into account anywhere, including India. The other principle is the importance of protecting anonymity on the internet, as anonymity as a component of the right to freedom of expression, and also protecting encryption. Not, let's say, in the sense that states shouldn't force, let's say, private companies to break or to provide, let's say, backdoors to governments to enter, let's say, the system and to interfere in communications. It's, I mean, according to the UN rapporteur, I mean, the damages, the harm that these can cause is, it does not compensate at all the benefits that you can get from allowing, I mean, backdoors in order to, in some cases, know, I mean, the identity of the originator of the message. So these are two very important international standards that need to be taken into account. And of course, that, I mean, in the case of these new guidelines, I mean, there's some sort of a conflict. I mean, the guidelines fall short of international standards when it comes to these two important provisions. Other than that, I mean, I think that something that for me it was shocking. It was to see the fact that intermediaries are regulated together with OTT platforms, for example. And I think that this is not a good idea. This is not correct in terms of, let's say, legislation.